Good afternoon, high school math teachers and college math professors. Thanks for making it out to our first meeting, which is just an introduction meeting, and we will have many more meetings to come. So we've all been asked to come together in order to find a solution to this problem. And let me explain this problem through the results of this study. So the PISA comes out with this study every 3 years, which ranks the education quality of the quality of education for each country amongst each other. So in 2015, the PISA study studied 71 industrialized countries, and the results show that for high school, for their high school education, the U.S. came 24th in the quality for science education and 38th in the quality for math education. And so this last statistic is the one that we're going to focus on and that we're trying to improve. And eventually, by the end of these sessions, we're going to try to figure out a more comprehensive solution to this problem. But for now, we need to start somewhere. So for this introduction meeting, we will focus on comparing the positives and negatives of lecture-based teaching versus computer-based teaching in order to get a better understanding of how we can improve the way we teach mathematics in high school. So we are all familiar with the lecture method of teaching, and because this is what we experienced in high school, and not so familiar with the computer-based style of teaching. And so let's put our biases aside and allow our guest speakers to go into depth about the positives and negatives associated with each method of teaching. All right, if we could have our first speaker. Hello, I'm John I'm a math professor at CSU, and I'm going to go over the outline for the lecture method of teaching. So first of all, a lecture is very economical, where it's cheap and it's very simple, where some extravagant format of teaching students can be, it's not practical to force all school districts to try and afford some extravagant style of teaching their students. Another thing is that there's a lot of peer interaction in this method of teaching, which is positive because that closely resembles the workforce, where there's a lot of interaction between individuals when trying to complete a task in the workforce, and this interaction parallels that very nicely. And so the next thing is, if a student has questions while they're learning in a lecture, then they simply have to raise their hand and the teacher will provide an answer. So now some of the negatives is that there's a big variation in quality when it comes to lectures from school to school and even within a school. And that's because each professor will give a different quality of education, and we want to try to even this out as much as possible. So that's one thing to keep in mind for the lecture. And also, the attention span of students was previously thought to be around 10 to 15 minutes, but a study which gave high school students a clicker and asked them to click a button every time they noticed that they had a lapse in attention during their lecture. So the results of the recordings showed that the attention span of a high schooler in lecture is far closer to 4 to 5 minutes as opposed to 10 to 15, which this attention span wouldn't mesh very well with a 50-minute lecture. So we have to keep that in mind and see how we can fix that problem. All right, so that's it for outlining the lecture. Now we'll go on to the computer. the computer method of teaching. Hello, I'm Michael. I'm a math professor at the University of Colorado, Denver. And I am going to go more in depth about the positives and negatives associated with the computer method of teaching. So what I mean by this is that instead of students just going to a lecture, they will go to a room full of computers and they'll go to their assigned computer and the computer will go through each section of the lecture instead. And so first of all, it'll be very good for attention for the students for short attention spans because you can design the program to work any way you want, where you can have breaks in between each section and in these breaks, these students can try to complete problems associated with the section that they just learned from. So you can have frequent breaks, and you can design to have any format that you would like that would best mesh with the attention spans of the students. Also, of course, there's an equal quality for every student. Every student will have the same program, and so they'll have the same quality of education. The last thing and most notable positive about this computer, at least I think, is that it's very reproducible, where it's just difficult to get that first computer program that effectively teaches the students, but once you create that first program, you now have a program that you can rely on that'll be consistent for the semesters to come. So now, the disadvantages associated with this style of teaching is that there's a lot more isolation. Each student has to as opposed to having a lot of peer interaction, they're just isolated to their own computer, and which is a lot different from the workforce. So we have to keep that in mind. And then the questions that they have will not be answered immediately. And we have to figure out if we do use this method, we have to figure out how students will get their questions answered while they're being taught by this computer program. So that sums up the outline from the positives and negatives for the computer method style of teaching. All right. All right, big thanks to both of the speakers. We appreciate that. And so now that we have a basic outline of both methods of teaching, we can see that we're faced with quite a difficult problem. And this problem is that both methods seem to be polar opposites from one another. And we have to work together in order to find the optimal balance between the two. So this reminds me of something that happened to me while I was volunteering. And when I was volunteering at an assisted living home, I was asked to call a game of bingo for the seniors, which I was delighted to do. It sounded like a lot of fun. So I started calling the numbers for each bingo round. And at first, there was a group of individuals that kindly requested for me to speed up the calling process, just at a higher rate. So I did so. And after a few more calls, there was another group of individuals that, again, they requested that I slow down my pace to the original pace that I started at. And so all of us had to come up with some way in which some pace that works for us all. And this is similar to that, where we have to find some balance between how much of a computer-based program we use, how much of a lecture, if one is even if even the computer-based program is practical due to budget issues. So what I would like all of you to do before next meeting is to brainstorm individually and also amongst yourselves to get a better feel for how everybody thinks on this subject, so that we can get a better grasp and understand what angle to work at in order to effectively work together and find the optimal way to teach our high school students mathematics. All right, I'll see you all next time. Thanks.